Hi, my name is Lauren and I chose marine oil spills for my presentation. What is an oil spill? An oil spill is the accidental release of oil into the environment, which is very harmful for marine ecosystems and is a form of pollution. They aren't always the result of a malfunction with a drill rig, and a lot of marine oil pollution actually comes from minor spills at gas pumps and dripping from cars that eventually gets washed into storm drains. I think that shows that just because we aren't on the coast doesn't mean we don't have an effect on our oceans, because our water eventually gets there anyways. Other causes include natural seeps from the sea floor, recreational boats, accidents involving oil tankers and barges, and storage tanks that contaminate groundwater. Oil spills have a significant effect on underwater plants and animals. Animals affected include sea otters, birds, sea turtles, dolphins, whales, fish, shellfish, and many more. Oil can coat birds' feathers, making them unable to fly and regulate their body temperature. It can also cause internal issues when ingested and affect the reproduction systems of certain species. Coral reefs are home to many marine animals and can also be affected by oil. Oil is extremely damaging to coral because it affects everything from their development and growth to their reproduction. So for cleanup methods, there are quite a few. First, we have oil booms that act like a fence and trap the oil so it doesn't spread any further. Skimmers are machines that suck up the oil and physically separate it from the water. Sorbents are different types of material that can actually absorb the oil. Controlled burns is just burning of the surface oil. I did want to mention with that the fumes released from burning the oil can actually be more harmful to the environment than it would be to just leave it. Dispersants are chemicals used to break down the oil. Hot water and high pressure washing. So hot water is used to get oil out of difficult places, and then machinery is used. Manual labor is exactly what it sounds like. So in some areas, workers will have to complete the removal process by hand using shovels, rakes, and buckets. Bioremediation involves the use of oil-attacking bacteria. Chemical stabilization are chemicals that prevent oil from spreading by solidifying it on the surface. And the natural recovery is what it sounds like. It's just relying on natural processes to break down the oil. So this slide is environmental impacts of oil spills. With cleanup, sometimes only the immediate effects of our actions are considered, which can lead to even more damaging impacts in the future. For example, dispersants are commonly used during the cleanup process, and they break down the oil molecules so they are more able to mix with water, which allows the oil to sink to the sea floor. This method only gets rid of the problem on the surface and makes the water appear clean. Once oil makes its way to the bottom of the ocean, it's almost impossible to get out, and we have to rely on nature to degrade it. Biomagnification, so we talked a little bit about this in class, but as a reminder, it is when toxic concentrations increase throughout the food chain as a result of organisms ingesting other organisms with toxins in them. Oil contains many toxins that are harmful for animals, and it can increase the concentrations of them exponentially in a food chain. For example, phytoplanktons are the lowest organism on the ocean food chain and remain near the surface. The phytoplankton is then eaten by bigger planktons, and the food chain eventually ends with large fish, sharks, and dolphins. The phytoplanktons are very susceptible to ingesting toxins because they live near the surface where spilled oil usually stays. Toxic concentrations can increase tenfold with every organism in the food chain. So this slide is the weathering processes of oil. Weathering refers to the physical, biological, and chemical changes that oil undergoes when introduced to an environment. Weathering is important for scientists and cleanup workers to understand when dealing with an oil spill, just because it shows them exactly how that oil is going to behave in that environment. The only one I'm going to talk about on this slide is the bottom one. Organisms in the water attack the oil and cause it to turn into a simpler molecular form, which they can use for energy. I think it's interesting that at least something in the ocean can use oil for good, and I've just included a picture of that on the bottom of the slide. So for a case study, I chose Deepwater Horizon oil spill. In April 2010, the Deepwater Horizon oil rig exploded, causing the largest oil spill in history. Natural gas destroyed a concrete core in the rig, and it traveled up to the platform and caught fire. Unfortunately, 11 workers died and 17 were injured in the accident. Massive amounts of oil were released into the Gulf of Mexico, and the leak wasn't actually completely sealed until late September of 2010, and that did go on for 87 days. Officials and scientists estimate that 4.9 million barrels of oil were released during that. This slide is the environmental impact of Deepwater Horizon. I did just want to mention I didn't do a slide of all the animals that can be affected during an oil spill, just because there are way too many to list, and oil is harmful for pretty much every animal it comes into contact with, whether that be ingesting it or they're covered in it. So to start off, we have plankton. As discussed before, plankton are the smallest organisms in the ocean and the lowest on the ocean food chain. Harmful carbon from the Deepwater Horizon oil was found all throughout their food chain. Corals are extremely vulnerable to ocean pollution and damage from human activities. The corals near the spill were visibly covered in oil, producing excess mucus, experiencing coral bleaching, losing coral branches, and in some cases even dying. Many contaminated fish experienced issues with reproduction and sexual development. Sea turtle population numbers were already on a decline and they were considered endangered at the time of the spill. The accident caused the death of many sea turtles, and the ones that did survive experienced major reproduction issues, which is obviously something that we don't want for an endangered species. Whales, dolphins, and manatees, the dispersants used during cleanup of the spill were later found to be extremely harmful to whale skin. The oil caused adrenal disease, lung disease, and death in all of these animal species as well. The Deepwater Horizon oil spill affected organisms within a 2,000-meter radius of the spill, and the habitats are expected to take decades to recover from it. So to end this presentation on more of a high note, we are going to go over the important agreements and accomplishments regarding oil spills. The 2016 global settlement was a $20.8 billion legal settlement that ended all claims against the owners of the Deepwater Horizon drill rig. Included in the settlement was a requirement for BP to donate millions to multiple organizations dedicated to environmental research involving the accident. The National Fish and Wildlife Foundation donated $23 million to cleanup efforts in the Gulf. The foundation started the Gulf Environmental Benefit Fund, which was created specifically for the Deepwater Horizon accident. The benefit fund has allowed them to put $1.4 billion towards projects relating to oil spills. The Restore Act requires companies involved with the spill to pay their criminal penalties to the Gulf Coast Restoration Trust Fund. It also led to the establishment of a council made up of governors from certain states that aims to address environmental issues with the Gulf. Natural Resources Damages Assessment aims to return the environment back to its state before the oil spill occurred. This process involves assessing the extent of the damage and estimating the cost of complete restoration. So to end off, I wanted to give a few ways to prevent future marine oil spills, and two of the big ones would be stopping water transportation of harmful chemicals and offshore drilling, which both of those obviously have really big risks. And then something we can do here at home is just being more aware of what we're putting down our storm drains. So the next clip is a short video that does a good job explaining the important points again and wrapping up this topic. Thank you for watching.
Last summer, in the heart of New Orleans, a 600-foot tanker collided with a 200-foot fuel barge, tearing the barge in half. Several 100,000 gallons of oil leaked out of the barge and into the fast-flowing Mississippi River, heading quickly towards the ocean. The oil spread down the river in minutes, immediately threatening drinking water intakes and wildlife. Responders sprang into action within hours of the accident. Using computer models and weather forecasts, they determined the path of the oil spill. With helicopter surveys, they assessed the damage and dispatched cleanup crews. Specialized boats with oil collection devices on their bows were sent to the scene. These devices, called skimmers, act like vacuums across the surface of the water. Hundreds of trained workers clean riverbanks and marshes using an unexpected tool: pom-poms. Noxious fumes from oil harms animals that can't avoid it, and others can be covered in it, leading to suffocation and death. Birds that get enough oil on their feathers eventually lose their ability to fly, and oiled sea otters can suffer from hypothermia. When oil spills occur, it can shut down beaches and fishing grounds. It can also lead to public evacuations. Environmental disasters can be prevented if cleanup efforts begin immediately. While large oil spills like the one in New Orleans last summer contribute to oil pollution, the ocean suffers from far more than the occasional spill that hits national headlines. In fact, hundreds of millions of gallons of oil end up in the ocean every year, and only 5% of that is from big spills. Most people don't realize that oil residue on roadways and oil dumped into storm drains are the #1 source of oil pollution in the ocean. For the sake of humans and animals, let's keep oil out of our ocean.